Good morning. I'm Dan Stockman from Global Sisters Report. If we haven't met, come find me in the lobby. I would love to say hello and tell you what we do. But here's the important thing. It is a privilege to welcome Theresa Flores this morning to present our workshop, Ethical Representation of Human Trafficking in Communications. A well-known Catholic human trafficking survivor activist and licensed social worker for more than 30 years, Ms. Flores is herself a survivor of domestic child sex trafficking. For 2 years, starting at age 15, she was sold in an underground crime ring in an upper middle-class suburb outside Detroit. But she is a survivor. Went on to receive a bachelor's degree in social work from Ball State University, then a master's degree in counseling education from the University of Dayton. She was appointed to the Ohio Attorney General's Human Trafficking Commission in 2009, testified before the Ohio House and Senate in support of human trafficking legislation, where her efforts were a major part of the success of those bills being passed into laws, including the Theresa Flores law in Michigan, which extended the statute of limitation for children who have been trafficked. Now, she is the assistant investigator with Global Centurion, researching the mental and physical health problems of more than 200 domestic trafficking survivors. 2010, she founded SOAP, or Save Our Adolescents from Prostitution, which has given away more than 1 million bars of soap all across the United States that are labeled with the National Human Trafficking Hotline number and has assisted in rescuing many victims. Ms. Flores has received many awards, including the University of Dayton's Alumni Association Christian Service Award, and at the 2012 State of the State Address, she received the Courage Award from the Governor of Ohio for her work against human trafficking. She's published 4 books. The audio version of her memoir was in the top 5 of all memoirs and biographies. She's been on the Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller list several times. She was featured in a short documentary, The Girl Next Door, which won awards at film festivals all across the U.S. Her story has been on The Today Show, MSNBC, 700 Club, CNN, Glenn Beck, and many local and national radio shows. The Soap Project has been featured on Dateline, Nightline, and America's Most Wanted. Please give a warm welcome to Theresa Flores.
Thank you. I'm exhausted. I need to retire. Jeez. The only thing that failed to say is I also work for the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. I've been in the role for about 1.5 years now. Clearly need to update my bio. And I am the program director there. So I think many of your organizations are members of the Sisters Against Trafficking. And I'm just really pleased to be able to be in this role, continuing the work that I've started a long time ago. So this is the first time that I've done a presentation such as this on really basically words matter. When we're talking about human trafficking, things are changing from the past. And so kind of bear with me on this. But we're going to talk a lot about what we think human trafficking is, and then I'll share with you the reality of what it really is. But I do want to give you some background, some information on human trafficking. I think it's important that when you leave here, you'll be able to tell somebody what is human trafficking. How many of you guys have gone to a session before on human trafficking? Raise your hand. A couple, okay. It's shocking to me that this is the second leading crime in the United States, and yet probably 10% of you know about it related to United States. This is the 3rd presentation I've given in the week, and it's consistently that. And I've been doing this for 15 years. So it's very sad as a survivor and shocking as a mother that people do not know the magnitude, the epidemic of this in our country. So like I said, it is the 2nd leading crime in the United States. 80% of all victims, and I'm speaking America, right? 80% of victims are women. So this is a women's rights issue. It's also a women's health issue. And 50% are children. We cannot forget that there are at least 20% that are men and boys as well. This does happen to them. And this is not smuggling, though smuggling can lead to human trafficking, totally different. It is used for the purposes of financial gain. That's the basis of it. So it can be for labor trafficking, for any kind of exploitation, or sexual exploitation as well. And so if somebody is over the age of 18 and they have a pimp is a human trafficker, all right? He is selling them, he is keeping all of the money, and she's being forced to do sexual practices for that. So that is human trafficking. Unfortunately, we have misnamed human trafficking as prostitution, and it is not. It's actually forced prostitution. If you are younger than 18, involved in sexual exploitation of any kind, you automatically, by federal definition, are a victim of human trafficking. Of course, we have misnamed this. Again, I was just on my phone looking at a recent article of a man being charged in Springfield, Illinois, with juvenile prostitution. There is no such thing, all right? There's no such thing as child prostitution, juvenile prostitution. It's human trafficking of a child. So those are just really important things to remember. So a lot of times when people hear that I am a survivor of human trafficking, they're like, oh, what country were you taken to? You know, and because we think of Taken, the movie Taken, like, oh, if you're American and this happened to you, then you must have, been kidnapped. And that was not the case. It's actually kidnapping is actually only 3% of the times that people are that are trafficked in the United States. But we do know that there's hundreds of thousands of victims of human trafficking in the U.S. So 3% of hundreds of thousands isn't really a small number after all. The majority of the time, if someone's trafficked, it's because they know somebody that did this to them. That is the majority of the time. 35 to 40% of victims are trafficked by a family member. And this is probably the most horrific, though they all are horrific situations. We deal a lot with survivors. We give retreats to survivors to help them heal. And the survivors that have been trafficked by a family member have the hardest time of recovery. A lot of times they have separated from their family, so now they have no support whatsoever. And it would be shocking to you to know how many there are that have never had a birthday cake before, have never gone to the zoo before. So that is another aspect of what we do with survivors. And then 62%, where my case actually falls into, were tricked into being trafficked, manipulated, blackmailed by somebody that just told them everything that they had ever wanted to hear. Very, very common way, especially for teenagers. Again, 40% are trafficked by family members. These are actually 2 photos that I found on Backpage.com when it was up and running. Now it's called Bedpage.com. These were ads under the escort section. And one of them was in Indianapolis, the one on the left before the Super Bowl. And, they usually are advertised as 22 years old, escort for an hour, $150. Now, do they look like they are 22 years old? How old do they look? 15. The other one, I think she looks like maybe 12, right? Yeah. These are actual photos that I took offline of them. And now you can clearly see this one here is in a hotel, right? So the 80% of all trafficking happens in hotels. All right, but what looks unusual for most people in this one is she's smiling. So they think that she wants to do this. Nobody wants to do this, right? Not one single person. I mean, we do know of sex workers, very, very small percentage that state that they do, but we also know that majority of them are trafficked as minors. So this is actually what it looks like. And it looks, they're being forced to smile, right? The reality of human trafficking in the United States is this. She will have to have sex with or sexual relations with 10 to 15 men every single night. 7 nights a week, right? 7 nights a week, 365 days a week. There is no sick time. There's no vacation time. Doesn't matter if you have your period. Doesn't matter if you're sick. You're out there, all right? And you know, I do these talks a lot of times, and a lot of men particularly believe that she wants to do this because she has to say that she wants to. Her job is to try to convince him to go with her because she usually has a per diem. She has to make $800 to $2,000 a night for her pimp. If she doesn't bring that back to him at the end of the morning, then she's beaten severely. This is very, very violent, all right? He gets her addicted to drugs, and so she won't get her drugs if she doesn't bring him this money. So she has to do whatever it takes, however many times it takes that night to get that money. She has a 40% higher chance of death than any of you. The death rate is huge. Even after escaping, which most don't escape, even after escaping, the suicide rate is over 40% as well, even after you get out of it. Because there's very few resources for survivors, all right? Very few resources out there for them. She most likely will die of murder from the buyer. We used to call him a John. Or the pimp, right, the trafficker, or overdose. And University of Toledo did an amazing study with women that were incarcerated that had charges of prostitution, and they asked them, you know, how long has this been going on? How long have you been forced to sell your body for money? Even if you kept the money, which most don't, or you had to give it over to somebody, or you gave it to the drug guy, or whatever. And they found that 77% of all women that had been charged with adult prostitution had been trafficked as children, right? It's the same process, same thing, just an age difference. Does that make sense? So if you're 18 is that cutoff, now you're being charged with prostitution, right? But the same thing, the same act happened to you at 17. So we have a systemic problem with our laws and with the enforcement of it as well. So, I look with the nonprofit I work with, the SOAP Project, we really work on children being trafficked. And so do the U.S. Catholic Sisters as well. Children being trafficked is a huge part of this. And if we don't rescue them out of this, if we don't stop this, then most likely they will become adult prostitutes, all right? And when that is the situation, you are going to be involved in the court system. Arrests, 90% of all prostitution arrests are of the female. And yet if we arrested the male, we wouldn't have to arrest the female, right? We need to start seeing her as a victim, because again, nobody wants to do this, right? We need to start seeing her as a victim, not the criminal, and arresting the man who's buying her. Because if we didn't have him buying her, we would not have this problem. Does everybody understand that? Okay. So she most likely will get pregnant, have multiple abortions, right? So she'll be dealing with layers and layers of trauma, right? In and out of the emergency room. Addiction problems as well is very typical. She might have a child and it's given up for adoption. You cannot be a good mother when you're being trafficked. So now you've got the court systems. So you have foster care involved in it as well. So it's a huge systemic issue that we are really not taking seriously in this country. I know so many churches that like, oh, we raised $20,000 and we sent it to Cambodia. I'm like, we need that here too. Absolutely. There are so few resources for survivors and victims of human trafficking. She will experience PTSD. They say that it's equal to what a vet coming back from war has, all right? Stockholm Syndrome, trauma bonding with the trafficker, depression, and then multiple medical needs that just really don't get fixed. 60% of the survivors we work with live under the poverty line. A lot of them are unable to work a 9-to-5 job, all right? And many of them, like I said, with the medical needs are off the charts. We have one survivor who's older than myself, and she was trafficked by a motorcycle gang, and she escaped. She was able to run away. They found her, got her back, and then proceeded to remove every one of her top teeth individually as a punishment to her. So now she's out of that, right? She's working, and she's been trying to save her money for years to be able to get dentures. So those are just some of the examples of the cruelty that this is. And yet, in the United States, we believe prostitution is an option. A lot of people think that it's something people choose to do. Nothing irks me more than when I hear people say, well, isn't that the oldest profession in the world? And I've had male physicians at a conference say that. I'm like, no, actually, it's the oldest oppression of women since biblical times, right? The oldest oppression. So that's what we have to always keep in mind. So what kind of images, and I'm going to write this down, what kind of words come to mind when you think of human trafficking? Tell me. Violence. Forced. What else? Bondage. That's a good word.
Misery.
Ugh. What else?
Threats.
What?
Threats.
Threats. Sorry. What else? Power? Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
Helplessness.
Mm-hmm. Trapped. Oh, wow. That's a powerful one. Trapped. Anything else? Fear. How about intense fear? Okay, now, what images come to mind if you're like, oh, I'm going to go hear a talk on human trafficking? What images come to your mind? Nothing? Oh. Hands bound?
Yeah.
Okay. What else?
High heeled
High heels.
skirts.
Okay. High heels, short skirts, chains,
Screenshots of ads online.
online ads.
Hands over the mouth,
Yeah. Covering the mouth.
especially the children.
Oh, I spelled that wrong.
Bruises.
What? Oh, bruises. Yeah. Thought she said roses.
Rural hotel room.
Hotels.
Farm fields.
Farm. Oh, yes. Let's talk about labor trafficking, right?
Hotels.
Yep. Yeah, hotels. Okay, that's a good list. All right. So you're right. Those are the typical things that we see. This is a typical picture, would you say? Right? Of somebody that's going to talk about human trafficking. Actually, it's nothing like this. All right? Nothing like this. Maybe Cambodia, Thailand, all right, where we have seen things like that. But there are really no bars on the outsides, all right? They're really on the insides, all right? Very few women are held. I mean, it does happen, okay? So all of the images that you mentioned can happen. They just aren't typical, all right? So how do you think it feels for a survivor to see that picture? Right? Especially when she knows that she never was in that situation, right? Very difficult emotionally for a survivor to see that because that is not reality. It does not look like that, all right? It is, you think of, let's compare old slavery with new slavery, right? In the olden days, were they held and bound to the land that they worked on for their masters? In some cases, right, usually only if they had tried to escape, right? But could they have just walked off the plantation and gone somewhere? Sure, they could have. They could have. Did they? Absolutely not. I mean, in some cases, they did try to escape, right? But the fear and the penalties were so high that that's what kept them there. Same thing for slavery now. Same exact thing. It's a brainwashing, a mental, it's like being in a cult. And at any time you guys have questions, please feel free to ask them. This is kind of why I do what I do, because this is the reality of human trafficking. Up here in the upper left-hand corner is Grace. And I think she just looks like she could be my daughter, you know. She's 15 here, and I think she's just precious. Unfortunately, all of these photos are photos of Grace. From the time she was 15 until this last one here, where she's 17 and died shortly after that photo. These are actually all mug shots of Grace from every time she was arrested for child prostitution. Again, a child cannot consent to do this, all right? In our country, we think of prostitution as a choice people make, right? Does it look like she chose this? Does it look like somebody's doing this to her? Sure, but she was arrested, right? What do you think that she's experiencing? Tell me. Addiction, absolutely. Violence. You got black eyes. She's not eating regular meals. No. What else? Abuse, absolutely. She got missing some teeth. What would the missing teeth be from?
Either being beaten or meth use.
Yeah, drug use or being beaten. Head concussions is a huge in this. Exhaustion. Absolute exhaustion. Do you know how many hours it will take you to bring in $800 to $1,000 a night? Especially if they just want a little something and not, the $150 act? Yeah. You're up 20, 22 hours a night. What else? Do you think she smells good? Mm-mm. No care. I mean, look, and look, this picture is like, look at the despair, right? Utter despair. And this is a child. This is a human being. This is, there's really no excuse for that. And this is very, very typical. This is what human trafficking looks like in our country. Except for we misnamed it. We called it prostitution. And then we assumed that she wanted to do that, or she was a bad kid, or just had bad parents. And we failed to help Grace. She died. And that's just not acceptable to me anymore. So let me tell you a little bit about the mindset before we go into some of the images that people think of in human trafficking. A lot of the times they are trafficked because they owe a debt. In my case, they took pictures and I had to earn those pictures back, so it was debt bondage. This can be very popular for, very common for labor trafficking, all right, owing a debt, all right. A lot of times they are bonded to the trafficker. It's called a trauma bond, especially if it's a parent, or family member trafficking them. Very similar to domestic violence, all right? A lot of times there's a language barrier, all right, that keeps them in it. They don't tell law enforcement because actually, unfortunately, law enforcement is the #1 profession that use the services of prostitution. The pimps, the traffickers do this intentionally to break their trust with law enforcement, It's also I'll just tell you the other three, so I'm not singling out law enforcement. It's also politicians, it's also pastors, right? People in high authority, teachers, right? Doctors, we see that a lot. Isolation, a lot of times they keep them hidden, they keep them away from people. When I was taken at night and taken to a home, I would be taken to the basement where there was no way I could escape. And there were only certain people that were permitted to be there. They give you false promises like, you just do this one more time and you'll have the pictures back. You just do this one more time and that's it, it's over, It's never over. And you got to remember, if you're a child thinking from a child's brain, you're like, oh, okay, A lot of times they've just lost hopelessness, many times addiction, and they just don't know what to do. They don't know how to get out of it. Like I said, nobody wants to do this. They really just don't know how to ask for help. You really do lose your voice. So this is, I just last night Googled human trafficking pictures, and these are all the ones that came up, okay? The word slavery is very popular, all right? Modern day slavery is what we call it. Now, I can tell you the first time I saw my picture in the Columbus Dispatch, and underneath it, it said, "Former child sex slave speaks out." I was like, I was a slave? And I was like, I look in the mirror and I don't think of myself as a slave, even back then. Was I being forced to do something I didn't want to do? Absolutely. Did they own me? Absolutely. Did I think of myself as a slave? Absolutely not. Because I had an image in my head of what a slave was and what a slave looked like. So slavery is a tough word. It is modern day slavery. You're being forced to do something, somebody's benefiting financially off of you. Every definition of it is correct. But the word is a tough word because we get an image in our head of what a slave looks like, and that doesn't look like me, does it? If I was sitting at that table and you had no idea why I was here, would you think, oh, that's a former sex slave? No, you wouldn't, right? And we need to kind of break down those barriers to see like, wow, there could be others in here. They don't have to look like a slave. Does that make sense? Okay, so using the word slavery is very difficult. I know at the U.S. Catholic Sisters, we're trying to get away from using the word slavery. Another, like you said, we have this one here, hands over mouth, very typical to see. At no point did my traffickers do that to me. You can make somebody not talk without having to do that, all right? Very unusual. That doesn't, you can use threats, you can, all sorts of threats to make somebody not speak. We do lose our voice. We are terrified to ever speak about what's happening. So the image I can understand, but it's not something that is typical if you're going to try and think of someone that's been victimized by trafficking. Oh, somebody mentioned ropes, right? Right? Never have I had that happen. All right. Rarely do we hear of stories where, you know, somebody was held in the basement, they were bound to the bed with ropes or chains. And that is occasionally. So all of these are things that can happen, but are not typical images of what happens. Again, very popular seeing these ropes on women. All right, because I think that maybe it makes us more comfortable with the images with the knowledge of human trafficking and sexual slavery in our country. Well, she's being bound. She can't leave. So it's like, oh, okay, I get it. But what happens if she's not bound? Then we think, oh, well, she can leave. But she can't really, all right? So it's almost like it makes us more comfortable thinking that she can't leave. Again, I see these all the time as well. The chains, you know, never saw any chains while I was being trafficked. Most of the survivors I know didn't either. A lot of times we see, too, the price tag. Now, we have heard stories of survivors that have had tattoos on them of barcodes, things like that. Not real typical. Can happen, all right? And I know these are images to portray trafficking, that she is, you know, a product. She's merchandise. She costs something, all right? But if you think about it from her perspective or his, he's not going or she's not going to identify with that. When I go to the Atlanta airport, you know, and I see all the amazing posters and stuff, and I hear the things in the little, in the bathroom, in the airport walking around, I hear it on the little train, like, we take a strong stance against human trafficking. If you're a victim or see a victim, please call this. At the time that I was being trafficked, if I had heard that, would not have done anything for me, because I didn't know I was a human trafficking victim. Had no idea until I was 40 years of age that that's what it was called, because these images don't show me what I went through. Does that make sense? Okay. So just if you're in charge of communications and you're talking about slavery and you're talking about human trafficking, just be careful. Like, who is your audience? Are you trying to be sensational to get people to draw people to you for this topic? That's okay to a degree, all right? Or are you trying to find victims? This would not be okay, all right? So just being careful of who is your audience. What is the purpose of why you're using these words and these images. Think about that. And you can always ask survivors, all right? You can always contact us and say, hey, what do you think about it? We always advise for survivors to be on any kind of committee that you have within your organization if you're going to work in human trafficking. Again, here we have the chains and a lock. Yes, people can be locked away. We probably see this more with labor trafficking than sex trafficking in the United States anyway. But again, not very typical. Bars, again, you know, these are just doing a simple Google search for human trafficking images last night on the internet, right? Now, let's look at this one here. What does human trafficking look like? You might be surprised. I actually like this one. I think this one is very good. Why does this one look good? It can be anybody. It really can. Yeah. And people are shocked that it's all races, it's all ages, it's men, which we talk about very little, right? And women. So love that. And I think it's shocking to people that like, oh wow, I would never have thought of that. Yeah. Why else would you think this is a good one?
It's relatable.
Hmm?
It's relatable.
It's relatable, yeah.
That point where we think that those people who have been trafficked are an other.
Yeah.
And they are
Somebody else. Mm-hmm. It happens to other people in other countries. It doesn't happen right here. Yeah. I can tell you.
Shows you to look more closely.
Yeah.
You see a situation, even though the person looks normal,
Yeah.
that might be other.
Yeah, we're so easy to be like, well, that can't possibly be it because they look like me or they, you know, yeah. So it's much more relatable and it's more in your face kind of too, isn't it? It's more like, wow, this looks like could be my neighbor. Yeah. So when you're using images, you know, I actually prefer not to using faces of people because then that makes a divider. I don't identify the men that trafficked me because I don't want people to be like, oh, well, that ethnic group or that group is not in my city, so that wouldn't happen to me or my children. So I prefer not even using faces, using some more of just a scenery type of a situation, right? This one I really liked, when you can't walk away. Now, why would this be a great, and again, you're not seeing a face, right? Why would this be a great image for human trafficking? She's not bound and free. Yeah. Yeah, she's walking away. She's walking down the street, right? So it makes you start to think like, why else would this be a great one? Yeah.
It also depicts that social isolation.
The social isolation, which is huge. Yeah.
And if you look at the space around her,
Uh-huh.
it gives you that sense of unease. Something's not.
Yeah.
She's not walking through the park here.
Right. She's not in the mall. She's not, yeah. Which, you know, we always say, oh, don't go to the mall today. There's a white van on, you know, people put it on Facebook. This is a kind of a dark, which is okay, right? A lot of times this is nighttime activity. It's kind of dark and alley-ish, right? So it's okay. Like, it's not showing her face. It shows her freedom, right? Right? That we think, because she's walking. She's not being held or bound. Why else would this be a good image to use? And what about the phrase? What about the saying on there? Do you like that?
She also doesn't look, and I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Going to mine, it's
We're
not
going to the
same.
words.
She doesn't look slutty.
She doesn't look slutty. And so we have on here high heels and short skirts, right? Is what we're thinking. She doesn't have that. She has like maybe a coat and some slacks on, right? Yeah. When I was being trafficked and I would be called out, I was in my pajamas. And I was usually barefoot. So those pictures never applied to me either, right? So yeah, when you can't walk away, and yet it shows her walking, right? So it makes you think, like, can she leave? She looks like she is. But I want you to start thinking, like, that's the purpose of a good ad, right? A good, you know, is to talk about, to make you start thinking, maybe I'm wrong in what I think of as human trafficking. Because clearly she is walking, right? Maybe it is mental. Anybody else have any other thoughts on this one?
It addresses her directly. Like
It does.
person directly,
Yeah.
survivor, person.
Yeah. And so, right. So it can be you yourself. It can apply to the victim, or it can apply to a bystander, can't it? Great ad that says, if I see this and I'm a victim of it, if I saw that in the Atlanta airport and I'm being victimized by it, would that apply? Would that resonate with me? It sure would. It sure would. Would that resonate with one of you traveling through the Atlanta airport if you saw something? You know, I think it would. I think it definitely would. And it says here, if you are a victim or suspect someone of being a victim, great. You just got the whole realm of this. Does that make sense? Okay. So healing of survivors is extremely intense and lifelong. Right? You don't just get over it when you get out. It lasts a lifetime. And so we do retreats for survivors. And I will tell you that it's the most special thing that we do are these healing retreats. This woman here is a dear, dear friend of mine. She's from Detroit, Michigan. And she was arrested for killing her pimp and sentenced to life in prison. Now, let me say that again. She was sentenced to life in prison for killing her pimp before he killed her. Now, something, again, like I'm saying, is wrong with our system, right? She spent 17 years behind bars. She didn't get to raise her two sons. She actually is the first woman to get a college degree behind bars in Michigan. Luckily for her, a lawyer found her case, retried it, and she got free. Now she is a master's social worker and helps other survivors as well as other people, has her own private practice. And a lot of these women become survivor leaders, is what we call them, if they can, if they're able to do that. And so very few times do they pour back into themselves, though, because they just want to help others because they know what they went through. And I convinced her to go on this retreat with us. It was donated to us by Charisma Hotel in the Dominican Republic. Didn't stink at all going to the Dominican Republic for a little retreat with 15 survivors, you know. It was an amazing opportunity to heal. And that smile on her face, to me, says it all. Like, that's what freedom looks like to me. This is what healing looks like to me. Just that abandonment of happiness and joy, right? And you don't think of that when you think of a human trafficking survivor. And that's exactly what it takes. So how different is this picture from these words, right? So different. If you're trying to reach out to other survivors or victims, these words don't, some of them do, all right? Threats, violence, like the ones that you said about what you're experiencing here, the words, yes. The images, no. So words and images do matter, but they just have to be, you have to consider who is your audience, what is the purpose of what I'm trying to portray, and why I'm trying to get this out. Would this resonate with who I'm trying to, reach? So if you're trying to reach people in your parish, right, to come to a human trafficking evening, to learn about human trafficking, what kind of images would you typically use? What would they be? If you're making a flyer. Pictures of children doing what? Reaching out. Mm-hmm. I've seen some of their hands. Oh, school uniform, yes. Yeah, absolutely. But so if you're going to do that, then you have to be very careful with the words, right? Because if they see that, like, oh, it's a fair for raising, money so that kids can get uniforms for school, right? You have to be very careful with what words go with that. But that could be very, very powerful, right? Using words like, did you know this happens to such, and to really draw them like, oh, wow, that is not what I thought of when I saw that picture. Great way to get people in, right? You want to make people care and make it, like she said, relatable. Like that this isn't something so far away. This is in my backyard. This is in my zip code, right? So, but you also want to tug at the heartstrings, which is okay. I'm not against tugging at the heartstrings because this is a heavy, heavy issue. This is something we need to address. It needs to be a top priority, in my opinion. It's the second leading crime. Yet most people have no idea about that because they still think it happens over there and that it doesn't happen in our communities, right? So when we think of these images, what other images do we think of now that you said a kid in a uniform, school uniform? Child in school uniform. What other images can you think of after we've just done this that you could use? In front of a, absolutely. In front of a computer, absolutely. A person in front. Okay, what else? Somebody else? Love that. Hotel. Yep. Right, absolutely. Do not disturb. I use that one a lot. What else could you use to talk about, to show human trafficking? Yeah.
I have sisters in Canada, so we have indigenous people.
Indigenous. Absolutely, yeah. I always forgot how to spell indigenous. Yep, absolutely. Missing. That's huge with the missing women's, the indigenous population. They're just going missing, and if you don't find a body, they're probably sold and being trafficked. So yeah, what else? A kid, yes. Which does happen in our country. I'm from here in Ohio. We've had several agricultural busts of dairy farms, chicken farms, you name it, of not just children, but people being trafficked here. What about a massage parlor? Oh, massage parlor sign. Not all massage parlors are like Massage Envy. Just saying. Any of you ever gone to get a massage at 2 a.m.? No, but go ahead. Big sporting events. That's my specialty. That's my nonprofit that does that does the big sporting events. Who usually comes to big sporting events? Men. Sorry. Men with money. Quarter Horse Congress is another huge one. Men that have a lot. Men without their wives. It's in the Bible about when you are separated from your spouse, then that is when the devil comes in. Much easier to do that when there's separation there.
The GOP convention in Cleveland had the highest rate
Yeah.
of prostitution.
We were there too. Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was gay prostitution.
Yeah, gang or gay?
Gay.
Gang? Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, anything like is not off the table. Like it's, we've done even concerts for soap outreaches and stuff. So anytime you get more tourists to an area, you get more men to an area. I mean, men are the buyers, all right? I have a wonderful husband. I'm not man bashing, but whenever you get a lot of men coming to an area away from their wives, extra money, like for the Super Bowl, it's a 3-night minimum stay during the Super Bowl. At any hotel, they all are doing it. So say you go to Phoenix, the Super Bowl's one day. It's a couple hours. Well, what else are they going to do? They're going there with their buddies. They're going to the strip clubs. Oh, wait, let's add that one. Okay, not everybody that works at a strip club is a victim of human trafficking, but it definitely lays the foundation for that, all right? tourist areas, army or like military installations near those areas, you're going to see more strip clubs, more massage parlors, you know. What other images could you use?
Maybe a room full of sewing machines.
Oh, love that. Yeah, like a factory setting. Yep. We are at the Sisters, very, very conscious, as I know many of you are, on buying things that are fair trade, that are sustainably, locally made. It is very difficult, isn't it, to find those things, and very, very expensive. So that is really unfortunate. So, and again, when you had, 3 of you knew about human trafficking in the United States, even less know about fair trade, unfortunately, in our schools, things like that. Yeah. Okay, what about words? Those are images that you can use when you're talking about human trafficking. But what kind of words now should maybe we be using? Maybe a little bit harder one, huh? Learn? Okay. Learn what? Learn the signs?
Learn the signs, learn who it could be.
Yeah.
Learn what to look for, not just
Yes.
in a trafficked person, but in a person who might be a trafficker.
Red flags.
Who's our audience for these words?
Who is the audience?
Yeah,
Yeah, I was thinking about the parish event.
Sure. A parish event. What about a high school event? A college event? So let's think about that.
so it's educating others.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just asking you, what words are we?
Yeah. So, yes, thank you for saying that. So, what is the purpose, right? Is when we're talking about representing survivors ethically, you know, in a good space, is it because we're trying to find victims? So, those are going to be different words. Is it because we want to reach out to survivors to help them? Different words. Is it because we want to raise awareness and educate people on it? So, good point. Those are all things that we have to consider. I would never use the word slavery with my ladies. We would not identify with that, right? None of these words would ever come up when I'm talking about my survivor sisters. Did we go through this? Absolutely. We all went through every single one of these things. All right, but we have to be sensitive. There's so much what do you call it? No, there's not the desensitization, which there is that too. Oh gosh, what do you call it? When the media tries to go above and beyond sensationalism. Thank you. Yes, I'll give you an example. I don't know how much time do we have. Anybody? 5? Okay, so. I'll kind of end it with this. I've done a lot of interviews, as you heard, with media on my story, on my mission, my ministry, what I do. The worst interview I ever did was by Pat Robertson, I'm just going to name it, with the 700 Club. I have a website called trafficfree.com, and I have it on there if you're interested in seeing. I have lots of different media interviews on there, but that one I posted with an intent because it was the worst one. So they fly me to Virginia, where his headquarters are, put me in a hotel, right, already. Okay, I'm getting some triggers going on, right? They don't know that. And I'm not, survivors aren't the best at voicing those, all right? Go to the hotel the next day. They have me come for hair and makeup. They do my hair and makeup however they want to do my hair and makeup. When I say that I had Southern Christian hair, I had big Southern Christian hair, okay? So I'm looking in the mirror, it does not look like me. Another trigger, okay? We go to the green room, his whole team is there, and they say, here's a list of the questions he might ask you. That's lovely. If you're ever going to interview a survivor, please do that. It really is helpful. Not hardly anybody does that. And so I'm looking over them, I'm thinking, oh, these are great. And really, truly, the Holy Spirit spoke to me. And it said, please tell him not to mention the name of the group of the men that trafficked me. And I never say that, but for some reason I felt like I had to say that. And so one of the people in the room said, okay, that's fine. We'll go out, and we'll go tell him. They came rushing back and said, well, he's read your book. I'm like, great. Because, most of them just thumb through it before they interview you. Great, that's wonderful, good news. And she's like, but I could tell on her face, she's like, no, this is not good news. I was like, and I'm feeling this energy, right? And she said, he wants to know why he can't ask you that question. Meaning he was gonna ask me that question, right? And it's because, and I understand in the book, I describe the group of people that trafficked me, because it is relevant to why I was trafficking. So is my religion, so is my family values. But you would have to purchase that book or go to the library and get it to know that, right? I never speak about that in public. And so automatically the whole room of staff is like, ugh. And one of the ladies said, we cannot guarantee you what questions he's gonna ask you or not ask you. So now I'm defensive, I'm scared after all of this, right? And on top of it. So I go out there, never met the man before. They have 2 chairs. This is live, international, by the way, as well. Another layer, right? Sitting in this captain's chair. He's there, old. I don't know if you know who Pat Robertson is, like grandpa of Christianity, of TV, of big cowboy boots and everything. It's like, hello, how are you? Tapes rolling. They play a video that I have never seen before. Not nice, all right? Because it was very triggering, all right? And then he says, nice to meet you. So I heard that you were spread eagle and bound and burned with cigarettes. First statement out of his mouth. Even if that's never happened to you, you're like, oh, right? And can you imagine if that had happened to you? Like, nice to meet you too, sir. And so luckily I've had media training, and I thank God I had media training, because I'm like, well, you know what? That didn't exactly happen to me. It happens sometimes, but let me tell you about human trafficking. And I was able to turn it around. Thank God, right? And so it doesn't get any better than that, all right? So I'm really literally sitting there, and I'm thinking, Theresa, if you just click your heels, you could just be gone. Like, wouldn't that be so nice? And these are the thoughts that are going through my head, like, I could just stand up and walk out. I could. No, I can't. Like, I mean, really, all of these things are like, I don't have to do that. Yeah, you do, And so I'm enduring this like most survivors would, most people with an important mission would. Does that make me a martyr? I don't know. But, and then afterwards, I get off the stage, and everybody floods to me like, oh my God, that was so great. Thank you so much. But I had a feeling they weren't saying it just from like, hey, that was great. That was like, we're so sorry. They're saying, we're so sorry. I get that a lot because people are like, I'm so sorry this happened to you. But that's not what they were saying, was it? They're like, I'm so sorry this just happened to you. And then I realized, walking to the green room, thank you, Lord, for this happening to me. Why would I say that? Do you know why? Because I was 45 years old. I had been out of it for 20 years. Can you imagine if that was a fresh 20-year-old survivor? And even that night, I will be honest with you, I wanted to commit suicide that night. That was how hard that was. Can you imagine if that had been her? And I said, thank you, Lord, for this happening to me. And I know this is part of my mission, is to teach people, be careful with the words that you use. Think about the images that you use. Because we're just people just like you. But we really need to start talking about this more. This needs to be on every platform of church, of schools, whatever. So thank you guys very much. All right. You guys have any questions? I don't know if we have any time. I do have a table. We don't have time. I have a table out there. You can stop by anytime.